Well, the Angel Flight is a 501c3 charity organization, a national organization. I think the umbrella organization is called Mercy Medical Airlift. And the Angel Flight is a regional branch of that. My dispatcher, my home office is in Virginia Beach, and I've been flying with them, for 10 years or so. Well, it's a true mitzvah. It truly is. It's a true mitzvah. It's a blessing on both sides. It's a blessing for me because I get to do something that I love to do and need to do in order to stay proficient. And it's a blessing on the other folks who've got a serious medical condition, can't deal with it in their hometown, have an ability to pay for the care, but the expense of getting to the care just defeats them. And so we provide that link, the Angel Flight does.
He was one of the, if not the most, certainly along with my parents, one of the most giving people that I have ever known in my life. And the Shepherd Center has been very important for him. Now, I'm simply an accessory.
I know that the Shepherd Center is a 12 months a year ongoing operation. And I know that they do their delivery of meals and helpful folks, as I help folks get out of town to go to a dock, Shepherd Center helps folks in town get to a dock. And it's the kind of organization that, in my book, far better done by human beings looking after other human beings than by some governmental agency halfway doing it. And it's a far more effective and humane process. And the enrichment programs that the spring and fall, they do seem to be well populated and popular, and it fills a need for folks who are, no longer punching a time clock, and keep the brain working, and keep in contact with fellow human beings, and those are all good things.
Well, Cleve Benedict really, really, really deserves that award.
There's a change that's come over America, a change that's great to see. We're going back to work again, it's better than it used to be. I'm feeling good about America, it's something great to see. I'm feeling good about America, and I'm feeling good about me.
Well, I was the older son of Cooper and Laura Benedict. I was born in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I just kind of was dropped there, so to speak. They were passing through. I don't believe I lived there more than 3 months of my life. My dad was working in England in 1936, 37. From roughly that time on until I was 10, 11 years old, was in Cincinnati, Ohio. After 1946, my dad was back in England, restarting Thomas Headley, a local, the British or UK subsidiary of Procter & Gamble. And so we crossed over to England in May of 1946 and lived in a great big house in the north of England for, well, till I came back in the fall of 1948 to go to school. And they came back in the spring of 1949 to live here in Lewisburg, Greenbrier County, in this house. Education was at the Hill School in Pottstown, Pennsylvania, and then that famous ag school in New Jersey, Princeton University. My father's middle name was Proctor, Cooper Proctor Benedict. His mother was Olivia Proctor, and she was a great-granddaughter of, I believe his name was Charles Proctor, who, with a partner whose last name was Gamble, began a soap and candle company on the banks of the Ohio River in the 1870s, I think, somewhere in there. It was a family operation for a good many years, and then the Proctors sort of came to the front of it. And it was quite a remarkable company, as a matter of fact. They, in those days, manufacturers ran until all the warehouses were full, and then they shut down and laid everybody off. And then when the warehouses were empty, they'd start up again, and it was very uncertain employment and very hard on folks who had to work in factories. And they devised a system of direct shipping, not by warehouse to, not simply great warehouses, but to individual businesses. So they were able to program and run the company year-round. So they had year-round employees. And they were the first operation to offer profit-sharing retirement programs from around about the 1890s. The joke was in the 1950s and 60s there were thousands of millionaires in Cincinnati who have been lifetime employees of Procter & Gamble. That way. Now my mother came out of a New York family. Delamotters were French Huguenots, so they came out of the Low Countries in I don't know, the 17th century, I think. But a New York family, and lived in New York and my mother was one of the first to move out, I guess, and married that Ohio fellow. Her father was well, I'm not sure how to describe him, because I, of course, didn't know him at all. But as he was described by my mother, he was a very brilliant guy who always was making something new, but it never quite sold. You know, one of those folks that always had a great idea, but someone else made the money out of it, and it was kind of sad. And he was tubercular, and my mother contracted tuberculosis from caring for him.
There were 12 children in my father's family and 8 in my mother's. Daddy was the next to the youngest, and his mother, I think, may have been the middle one. And she was, as many bright young women were in those days. She and 2 of her sisters were school teachers. And my father, his father was a South Carolinian who had been a bank president in South Carolina, and early in this century, or in the 19th century, the previous one had bought an old brick house up on a hill and 40 acres of apple orchard and an acre of vegetable garden, and had moved his family there. So Daddy grew up in Winchester, Virginia, in a great big old house that a woman from New York City, a Mrs. Tidball, had built in 1843. We found a letter from her to her son in New York City that had never gotten mailed behind a mantelpiece in the old house. And so that's how we knew about Mrs. Tidball. And of course, old houses creak. And at night as they sell them, that was just Miss Tidball checking to make sure everything was all right. We were never afraid of ghosts. So my brother and I sold vegetables in the summer. That's how we made our Christmas money and mad money. And you called and ordered, we picked and delivered. The high school I attended, Handley High School, was an endowed public high school. So I had 4 years of Latin in a public high school. I had chemistry and biology in a public high school. I had wonderful English courses. When I was growing up there, we had a prisoner of war camp during World War II. And there were White Russian prisoners and German prisoners, no Japanese. And you could hire some of them to work on your farm. And we had 40 acres of apple orchard, and we needed, some hired help. And I can remember we had two, a young white Russian who spoke no English at all, but he was a worker. He was a good one. But the one I called Angie spoke English. He was big, tall, rather handsome, dark-haired German. And that's where I learned to sprechen Sie Deutsch. And in college, I took 2 years of Spanish and I took German. And I remember reading Im Westen nichts Neues, All Quiet on the Western Front, auf Deutsch. And he said, Herr Sullivan, big, tall Irishman, said, do not translate it, just read it. And I thought, oh, sure. And then the tears are running down my face. They're being shelled and they're screaming, the horses are being killed and they're screaming, and I realized I'm reading it. I really am reading it without translating it. I was reading it auf Deutsch. And it would never have occurred to me to be interested in that language. I have had Latin, 4 years of Latin. I'm a Romance language person. And I took Spanish in college. But German was something different, and that's what I was looking for. And I found it. It was a very, very moving experience to be able to get your mind to accept something totally unfamiliar and enjoy doing it.
My father had an older man at Proctor that, I guess, like a mentor, and that he'd worked with and as a junior relationship, and that individual name was Ward Buchanan, and he used to vacation at the Greenbrier in the 1930s, and persuaded my father to vacation there one year in 1938, 39. And Mr. Buchanan was the age where he was starting to look toward retirement, and he liked the neighborhood. And so they bought here as partners. That's where the Ben Buck farm comes from, Benedict and Buchanan. And the plan was the older man was they each built a house and deeded themselves some 30-some acres around their house. And the plan was that the older gentleman, Mr. Buchanan, the house up the road, was going to be here full time and look after things and kind of be the partner in charge. And then my dad would come along in later years and he would take over. Well, the poor guy, they built that house in 1940, 41. He died in 1942 of a massive coronary. So, but anyway, my father then purchased his share, and so that's how we became the owners of Ben Buck Farm.
I went to Hollins College near Roanoke, just outside Roanoke. Loved that. And I met Cleve Benedict on a blind date at a college neither of us attended. But a friend of mine at Hollins was dating a boy who went from Lewisburg, who knew Cleve, was going to VPI. And midwinter dances are a big thing. And it's big band music. We had the Dorsey Brothers Orchestra to dance to, live. And so they set up this blind date between Cleve, who was home on Christmas break or whatever. And I can remember going out after a dance or day, you always went out to get something to eat. And the car was crowded, so I was sitting on his lap, and I remember looking at him thinking, this is the nicest man I ever met. Someday I'm gonna marry somebody just like him. Why not him? Fate was sealed. We Southern girls can pursue very charmingly.
Oh, well, the light of my life, what do I say? I mean, it's been quite a journey. she's put up with a lot. Yeah, for as feisty as she is, she has endured some. In our early days, we lived in Philadelphia, and our first child was born in Philly. We had a 2-bedroom apartment, and she didn't work outside the home. We went to Buffalo, New York, in the early spring of 1959. Second child was born there.
Procter & Gamble had just introduced Crest toothpaste, and he was detailing dentists, calling on dentists, urging them to recommend Crest toothpaste. So we were in Buffalo for 2 or 3 years. It changed. The winters went on forever. But finally, it was time. Cleve's dad was not well, and Cleve said, "Time we go home, go to the country."
It was Halloween in 1961, and we loaded the 2 kids in a little station wagon. And our older boy Cooper was like 3 years old, and Ruth was like 9 months old. And we loaded up in a station wagon and started driving from Buffalo, New York to Lewisburg overnight. And as you know, 219 goes all the way north to Dunkirk, New York, which is kind of south, a little bit west of Buffalo. And that's a long, lonely road overnight. And we got home down here, I don't know, mid-morning the following day. And here we were in our mid-20s, 2 kids, starting a new life, and we were just full of ginger and ready to go. And I didn't know much about actual hands-on dairy farming at that point, but I was lucky. A fellow in the neighborhood named Dick Skaggs, Richard Skaggs, kind of took me under his wing and was a mentor for me for a couple of years, and really taught me most of what little I know about the business. And we began kind of involved in the community and active in the farming community, and ended up on the board of local board of the Dairy Herd Improvement Association, and the marketing committee for the milk co-op that was handling our milk. And when that came along in 1964, it happened very rapidly. I mean, there was word of the airport to be built, and then boom, next thing you know, they're out there with a paper serving saying we're coming on your place and doing the engineering work. And it was very, very difficult for my father and mother. They never could accept the reality of that scar up there. And it wasn't much fun for us living down there. We lived down closer to Benedict Lane in those days. And you hear the chainsaws and the trees fall. Then you could hear then went from that to start to move dirt. And the constant travel of getting across from our house across the construction site out to 219. And so we had to thread through the construction for about 2 years, 2.5 years. And they were always good about keeping a serviceable road. I got to give the folks credit for that, they were. But it was to see ground that you'd lived on, walked on, worked over. The patch of woods was about 98 acres of timber that had not been cut in the 1930s. It was a beautiful patch of woods. Just to see all that go. But it was hard. And my dad died while it was still under construction. They were still moving dirt. Because I remember my mother brought him home. Instead of leaving the hero, brought him home. And when he left, when the hearse took him from here out to the church, well, they all shut down. And I thought that was a wonderful mark of respect. Because they clearly weren't friends, but that was a wonderful mark of respect. And I remember that, obviously clear as day. But then, the machine started back up, and they finally put down the blacktop and painted the lines. The airport was open, still no road. So for 6 months maybe, we crossed the runway. And then when school came, and school buses started to run, I guess it was the county board put down their foot and said, you got to build a road. And so one got built of sorts. And it's widened over the years, and I think probably your mother, Mrs. Sharp, got the last pretty substantial improvement in going from to a full 2-lane road. I kind of gave her credit for that. She seemed to know her way around better than most of us. With us and for our neighbors north was through condemnation. My father wasn't interested in selling. It didn't matter what price they offered him. And he built his house back here, and he'd gone to some trouble to have privacy. And to have an airport within a quarter of a mile of his house was just, he just couldn't get his head around that. And so no, it was the condemnation. And well, he even challenged the constitutionality of the law, the underlying law that authorized the airport. And as a matter of fact, he won. He and Homer Holt was the attorney, super guy, Mr. Holt. And they took it to the Supremes, and the Supremes agreed that it was, basically the argument was that the legislature had passed a special use law naming only Greenbrier County when they could have produced a general law would have done it for the whole state. So it was thrown out on that basis. But unfortunately, it was thrown out about the time the legislature was going into session. It wasn't hard to correct. So it was a victory, but it was a Pyrrhic victory. It didn't change the outcome. And and the reality was that the price offered by the airport authority was generous for the time. That wasn't the issue.
It's not the issue.
That wasn't the issue. It's his place. He wasn't ready to sell it. So that's that. While this was going on, Ann kind of founded the Greenbrier Valley Theatre down there on the river with another like-minded group with a tent there in a field belonging to the Snyders.
I am one of the Snyders of the corporation charter for Greenbrier Valley Theatre, and I'm a professional actor, a member of Actors Equity. I'm retired now, and I get a pension check, which surprised me like anything when that showed up. But I'm very proud of it. We started in a tent in the summertime. Then we had torn down a barn here, and before the airport was built, we had a field up there, and we tore down the old barn and we moved it and built a barn, which we used as a theater, and it was just a summer theater. I never thought I would end up being a professional actor. Of course, I read all of Shakespeare. I was an English major, and I had read plays. And I can remember play acting growing up, walking through the apple orchard, making up characters and things. So it didn't feel strange to me at all. I didn't make up lines. We don't improvise. I had to learn lines and learn the blocking. But it was a joy. I've enjoyed every minute of it. I've just loved it.
And then Tommy Seidenstricker discovered her and asked her to come and help run a horse show at the State Fair. She kind of moved into being full-time manager of the State Fair horse show, and it built into a good show. And I think Ann also had the very first 4-H horse show, county horse show. Got that enterprise started.
Somewhere in the 1970s, she got Judy Lawrenson was exec director of the Family Refuge Center, the FRC. Early days. The FRC wasn't really welcomed in the community in the early days. It was perceived as busybodies, getting in between, interfering in family life.
No more keeping quiet for me.
The sheriff's department didn't want to be helpful. The town cops didn't want to be helpful. It was not a socially attractive operation.
Our daughter had been in an abusive relationship, which she managed to escape from. And so I was drawn to that cause. And I was on that board for quite a period of time. I've been a Girl Scout leader and a member of the Black Diamond Girl Scout Council Board, which I loved. I grew up as a Girl Scout. And the girls and I had a good time. We camped. I mean, we did some crafts and things, but we were an active troop, and it was great fun. It really was. I enjoyed that enormously.
Ended up working for Governor Moore in his administration. He invited me to be chairman of the Probation and Parole Board, which is for the adult system. In that 1974, life was much simpler in 1974 than it is now, and we were 3 amateurs on the parole board, and we would have the hearings of folks who were eligible, and we'd make that life or death decision for them, whether they could go and sin no more, my son, or stay around. And they're people just like you and me, and you think that they're, for the grace of God, go I. It's just, and you sit and listen to their stories, and you think, wow. And some of them, you know that they won't function without the structure of the prison system, and others you think, well, maybe you got a shot at it. And we like to let folks go as much as we could. We thought would, yeah, but the principal criterion was safety. You don't want to turn somebody loose that you think might harm another person. But 9 out of 10 of the inmates were there for bad checks, boy breaking and entering, stupid stuff. At least things that you and I consider stupid stuff. Don't do that anymore. You know? And part of our job was having hearings at the jails for the folks who had been on parole and not behaved themselves, and you have to decide whether to give them another shot or take them back to prison. But I'm glad I didn't do it for more than a year. I mean, I got cussed out more than once, and you get tears, and there's a whole range of human emotions across that table, and it was quite an experience. It truly was. A year and a half or thereabouts after that, there was a vacancy in the Commissioner of Finance and Administration in the government, which is kind of the state's controller, fiscal officer, in charge of the general revenue budget. It is a good training ground for government service. I mean, this was in the days before the super secretaries. The commissioner of finance was reported directly to the governor, and that was as high as it went. And we had the budget for the revenue. We did state purchasing. We had building and grounds, and swept the halls and polished the brass. I had that job until change of administration in January 1977. I'd even been responsible for building the stands for the inauguration of Governor Rockefeller. Kind of like building your own gallows, so to speak. I remember watching that being constructed. Because, of course, my job ended the day he walked in.
While some on rights and some on wrongs prefer their own reflections, the people's rights demand our song, the right of free elections. Law and order be the state with freedom and protection. All stand by the ballot box for fair and free elections.
Became state chairman of the Republican Executive Committee. Was recruiting candidates one year to run for Congress in different offices. I was working hard on a candidate for the 2nd District, which is this part of the state. And I think we had a very positive guy, would have been a really good candidate. But he kept coming back with another demand. Well, if he can do this. Well, if he can do that. He always had something else. And I finally got to the point, I thought to myself, if I can do all that, I just well run myself. And so I did. And my experience is that, it didn't make a grade that time, but we got fairly close. And the incumbent was a gentleman named Harley Steigers, Congressman Steigers. Been there for years and years and years. And he didn't choose to have another go-around. So his son filed, Harley Steigers Jr., same name, same family. And but what happened there was that it's been so long since the office had been open, there were Democrats all over the state who thought they ought to be the congressman. And it evolved. There was a member of the House of Delegates from Martinsburg, Eastern Panhandle, strong young guy. There was another candidate, strong candidate from Fayetteville, lawyer there in big county, Fayette County. They carried a big load in the district. Then there was the Steigers, the three of them. And it was primary came down to the end, and it was a very close vote. It was essentially declared a tie, and everybody's kind of standing around, scratching their head what they're going to do about it, a recount. And the county clerk goes to the courthouse in Fayette County the day after the primary election and says, well, there's 1,000 votes we didn't find last night. Mr. Hamilton wins. And everybody stood around and scratched their heads. The election was over and Mr. Hamilton won. And he was exactly the right opponent for me. Far too politically liberal for the district. And I won the election handily.
I'm feeling good about America, and I feel it everywhere I go. I'm feeling good about America, and I feel you ought to know.
And I had a good 2 years to be there, 1981, 82. And I'd made a couple of campaign commitments. One was the Cranberry Wilderness. I'd indicated that I would work to see if I couldn't bring that about. And it was just good fortune that my office was down the hall from the gentleman who was the chairman of the appropriate subcommittee of the Committee of the Interior, a fellow named Cyberling, John Cyberling. Heck of a nice guy. From senior Democrat from around Toledo somewhere in northern Ohio. He'd been wanting to do it for years, but the protocol, courtesy in the Congress was that if the incumbent member representing the district didn't choose to want to go forward with the project, it wouldn't go forward. And Mr. Stigers, for whatever reason, had been opposed to the Cranberry Wilderness for years and years and years. And it's true, there were coal reserves under the ground. That not they were ever going to be mined, but they were there, and that was, I guess, the ostensible reason. But anyway, I remember Mr. Cyberling put my name on the bill with his, so I was a joint co-sponsor. And we had the hearings in the House, and of course the administration was opposed to it. The Reagan administration was not interested in more wilderness areas. So they sent people up from the Department of Agriculture here or there to testify against it, but the Democrats controlled the committee and it moved forward. And we had to pass it in the House on the day when the ranking Republican member of the subcommittee was going to be out of town. Because if he was there, we'd have to have a roll call vote, and we weren't so sure about how that would come out. So we did it on a unanimous consent, which means if it's going to pass unless somebody stands up and demands a roll call vote. And so it passed the House on a unanimous consent. I remember going over and testifying on behalf of the bill before the Interior Committee in the Senate, but then it just sort of disappeared until the very end of the Senate session in December of 1982, after the election, and it came back to the House because it had been modified in the Senate to accommodate some of what the administration wanted in terms of language and consideration of future sites. And so it came back to the House, and the call came, will you want to go ahead and pass it, Cleve? I said, yes, by all means. So it did pass right at the tag end of the Congress. And Mr. Reagan, in spite of all, signed it, which I took as a great gift. But I didn't really expect that, but he did. So it became law in 1983. The other triumph was Stonewall Jackson Lake. There was a long-standing flood issue in downtown Weston that they'd been battling for years. And the Corps of Engineers had the plans all worked out, and it had been on the books to be done for a number of years, but again, the incumbent congressman didn't support it. And I recall, that was one of my few floor speeches in support of it. And Mr. Cyberling, I remember asking me, do you need help on this? And I said, yes, I sure do. Because most Republicans voted no, because it was spending money that, so it was largely thanks to my friends on the other side of the aisle that got through the House, but it did. In the Senate, it went on through through the Senate, and that became law. And they went to work very rapidly. And of course, now that's one of those things where, the one legislation, the environmental community thought I was doing the right thing. And the coal operators thought I could hold a telephone out here and hear the comments. But on the Stonewall Jackson, it was flip. The environmental community thought I'd done, and I understand that there are a lot of folks had to move, they were displaced, and I understand that pain because I went through it just up the road here with the airport, and it knocked a lot of real estate off of this place, and my father never could accept that. So I understood the pain, but life goes on, and sometimes hard calls get made. But yeah, those are the two. If I had 2 years to be there, I picked the right 2 years, and I felt good about those two accomplishments. And then, I was some of the votes that shifted the direction of government and size and tax were all very close votes, and required a certain amount of help from the other side of the aisle. But they were quite close votes, and I was there to vote other than my opponent would have voted. But I felt, so it was a good 2 years, but it was not an easy fit for me. I'm not a politics, one has to be content with the conversation. And my life has always been more about seeing something done. If you're in an election campaign, there's votes in a box. You've got to stand. You did, you didn't do it. You on a farm, you milk cows, you pay the bills, you don't pay your bills. You're selling toothpaste, you ship the boxes or you don't ship the boxes. I need that evidence of progress. Whereas in the legislative arena, you have to be content with the conversation and the negotiation and go on again. And I just, as a minority member in the House, it was not a good fit. So I thought, if I'm going to be in this process, I want to be in the chamber where things run, where my party runs it. So that was the Senate. So I foolishly took a shot at that, but I sent me back home. But that's okay. I was in way over my head in that election in 1882. Didn't realize it until about August, and knew I was a terrible mistake. And there I was. But there's nothing to do at that point but walk the road to the end of it and say, okay, we'll move on from here. And
after Cleve came home, I stayed in D.C. for a while because I was working for a nonprofit called the Congressional Award, which was not run by Congress, but it was an award presented to young people for accomplishment.
But I guess I was restless at the farm and wasn't quite ready to quit. And Mr. Douglas decided he was going to take a shot at being governor. So he filed for governor, so I filed for agriculture commissioner. And that worked. And to everybody's surprise, including to some extent mine at that point. So it was a good time. Ended in a run for governor, which I had an inadequate campaign. That's all you can say about it. Should have won, but when the attacks come, and they inevitably do, how the campaign responds as a whole makes the difference. And we didn't get it right. And so back to Greenbrier County. I mean, I have not regretted that a bit. And each phase of the career, the process, has had its benefits and it has its positives. And while it hurts like the devil to lose, there's always something good comes out of that if you just kind of keep the door open and keep working, and not just let it beat you into the ground, even though it does color your judgment in strange ways for a period afterward. But it was good to come back home.
Sing praise to God who reigns above, the God of all creation, the God of power, the God of love, the God of our salvation.
And I grew up in a very old Episcopal church in Winchester, Virginia, founded by Thomas Lord Fairfax, who most of Winchester was a land grant from the king, and Thomas Lord Fairfax's coffin, he is interred in the undercroft of Christ Church, Winchester. Cleve also grew up as an Episcopalian, so that there was no conflict there at all.
We started going to St. James because that was was expected. I mean, we participated. My grandfather was an Episcopal priest, and father was, so it was a small church, much smaller church in those days. Anne was the first woman to be elected to the vestry, and the ground didn't shiver particularly hard, and life didn't end as we knew it. And went on. I think she became the first senior warden, and the senior warden in the Episcopal Church is kind of the rector's warden. They're the go-between between the clergy and the congregation and the clergy. And she was the first female to hold that job. So she's a bit of a pioneer. She tells you the story of Bob Leggett and the GVT. Well, she's the one who had the gumption to pick up the phone and call Bob Leggett. Not anybody else on the board. She did.
It was just a summer theater. But we could not survive that way with having to import actors. We needed a home. In that Leggett building, it sat there, and we had hired Kathy Sawyer as our artistic director. We had an office on the 3rd floor in Carnegie Hall. But that's not a good performance space for theater, for music and for other things, but it didn't satisfy what we needed. And the Leggett building had sat empty on Main Street for quite some time, so I called Bob Leggett in Lynchburg, and it was 50,000 square feet. I knew the dimensions of the building on 3 floors. No, 2 floors, a basement and then the big floor. And I said, what are you asking for that empty store in Lewisburg, West Virginia? And he said, I don't know, make me an offer. 50,000 square feet. I said, $100,000. He said, sold.
And she and Bob Leggett closed the deal. And she wasn't afraid of sticking her neck out and taking a risk.
Well, somebody had to kind of just grab hold and say, let's do this. And I've always kind of been that sort of, let's do it. Just quit talking about it and do it. So I went in to Carnegie Hall. It was Kathy's birthday. And I walked up to the 3rd floor to her offices and said, happy birthday, Kathy. I bought us a building. You did what? So I told her, and we borrowed the money to pay for it. We paid off buying the building fairly rapidly. But of course, then we had to turn a department store into a theater, and it works wonderfully. The biggest hallmark of my life here has been Greenbrier Valley Theatre and my association with its growth and with its development.
Her role in A Little Night Music, she had the role that was created for Hermione Gingold. Basically, it was kind of a character actor created to be sort of comic relief, I think, in the show. But under Anne's interpretation, it became sort of she became the not only the narrator, but she caused the action to change, to move to the next phase. It was quite a transition for the part.
I don't even try to learn lines until we block a play, because it works physically. If I'm here doing this, I say that. And it's, you enter from here and you go over there, and he's sitting there and he gets up and you all talk. And that's blocking it. And the actor, that's not made up, that's done by the director. And I have discovered that the marriage of the movement, where who you are and what you are doing, makes it so much easier to learn lines. It's almost natural. If I'm here doing this, I say that. We have a children's program that is just blossomed because it's a very marvelous discipline for young people. They can enjoy doing it, but there are reasons for doing it certain ways, and I think it's a really good thing, especially for teenagers. They don't have to run around on the streets. but they can have a good time and they can make friends and they can learn and they can be somebody. And that, I think that self-respect is a really important thing for young people to be able to build and to have. And then we are now back to the legislature, West Virginia's official state theater, and I'm just so tickled that we can do that.
Life's been good. 3 children, they've all grown, assorted grandchildren, many of them grown, not all. Time does go by. We have been very fortunate in our 58 years. Okay, may there be another 58.